The twin suns of Rax-Thul painted the massive arena world in hues of amber and gold, their light catching the crystalline spires that rose like monuments to combat across the planet's surface. This was where the galaxy's finest came to prove themselves, where honor was earned in blood, strategy, and the roar of 10 million spectators. Kara Vorthak stood at the edge of the Grand Colosseum's observation deck, her blue skin gleaming in the afternoon light. Her crimson curls danced in the artificial breeze generated by the arena's atmospheric processors, each strand seeming to pulse with the same fierce energy that had carried her through 47 consecutive victories. She was Rax-Thul's greatest champion, the blue lightning of the arena, and today marked the opening ceremony of the Galactic Trials, the most prestigious tournament in known space. Another season, another parade of pretenders, she murmured to her aide, watching the transport. Ships descend like metallic insects toward the landing platforms below. Among those ships was a battered Earth frigate, its hull scarred by countless hyperspace jumps. From its cargo bay emerged Captain Tobias Drake, adjusting his worn leather jacket against the alien world's strange atmosphere. He was tall for a human, with dark hair showing premature silver at the temples and eyes that held the calculating gleam of someone who'd survived too many impossible situations. The prize money from this tournament could solve his crew's financial problems permanently, if he could somehow avoid getting killed in the process. The opening banquet that evening was a spectacular affair held in the Colosseum's Crystal Palace. Representatives from dozens of species mingled beneath floating luminescent spheres, their conversations a symphony of clicks, growls, and harmonic tones. Kara entered like royalty, her ceremonial armor catching every light as she moved through, the crowd accepting the admiration that was her due. Tobias nursed a drink that tasted vaguely of copper and ozone, studying the other competitors. Most were physically imposing specimens, 8-foot Caridian berserkers, insectoid Theta Prime strategists with compound eyes that missed nothing, crystalline Valdorians whose bodies could harden to diamond density. He looked laughably outmatched. "So this is what Earth sends us?" Kara's voice carried across the nearby conversations as she approached his table. Her crimson curls framed a face that was undeniably beautiful despite its alien features. High cheekbones, eyes like polished emeralds, and a smile that held no warmth. A single human? How quaint. "Just me," Tobias replied mildly, not rising from his seat. "Though I suppose that makes it a fair fight." The nearby conversation stopped. Kara's eyes narrowed, her smile becoming predatory. "Fair? You think one human equals one Vraxian champion?" "I think one human equals whatever the situation requires," Tobias said, taking another sip of his alien liquor. "But I'm curious about something. All this talk about Vraxian superiority. Care to put your money where your mouth is?" The silence around them expanded like a ripple in still water. Even the musicians stopped playing. Challenging Kara Vorthak wasn't just audacious, it was potentially suicidal. "You wish to wager against me?" Kara's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "What could you possibly offer that would interest the undefeated champion of Rax-Thul?" Tobias smiled, and for the first time since arriving he looked genuinely confident. "Simple bet. If I can beat you in even one trial, just one, you serve as my honored guest for the remainder of the tournament." The gasps around them were audible. The honored guest vow was sacred in Vraxian culture, binding the servant to share their deepest secrets, stand as their master's envoy, and offer complete trust and loyalty. It was a role typically reserved for closest family or most trusted allies. Kara's blue skin flushed darker with indignation. "And when you lose?" "When I lose, I forfeit all prize money and publicly acknowledge human inferiority to the entire galaxy." The crowd pressed closer, sensing history in the making. Kara studied the human's face, searching for deception, fear, anything that might explain his impossible confidence. She found only calm determination. "Very well, human," she said, extending her hand. "Let us see how your species handles defeat." Their handshake sealed the bet, and with it changed the course of two civilizations. The mental gauntlet was Rax-Thul's most feared trial, a zero-gravity maze of crystalline chambers where physics itself seemed to twist according to alien logic. Floating platforms shifted positions based on mental commands. Energy barriers responded to emotional states, and the very walls could be reshaped by pure thought, if one possessed the discipline and training to master such feats. Kara entered the preparation chamber with the fluid grace of someone who had conquered this trial dozens of times. Her crimson curls floated freely in the zero-gravity environment, creating a halo of fire around her blue features. She moved through her meditation ritual with practiced precision, her mind settling into the focused calm that Vraxian warriors spent decades perfecting. Tobias floated nearby, apparently doing nothing more than stretching and checking his equipment harness. The crowd viewing through the transparent barriers whispered among themselves. Surely the human understood what he faced. The mental gauntlet had broken the minds of seasoned warriors from species far more psychically gifted than humanity. Last, chance to withdraw gracefully, Kara said as they approached the entry portal, her voice carrying genuine concern beneath its mocking tone. The gauntlet shows no mercy to the unprepared. Appreciate the warning, Tobias replied, his eyes studying the shifting geometry beyond the portal. But I didn't come this far to quit at the first challenge. The entry chime sounded and they launched themselves into the maze. Kara immediately began the traditional Vraxian approach, deep meditation to sync her thoughts with the crystal matrix, gradually asserting mental control over the floating platforms and energy barriers. Her movements were a dance of pure concentration, each gesture calculated to maintain perfect harmony with the chamber's psychic resonance. Tobias took an entirely different approach. Instead of trying to dominate the environment through mental discipline, he began experimenting with its physical properties. When a platform refused to respond to his thoughts, he used his momentum to push off nearby walls, treating the zero-gravity space like a three-dimensional puzzle rather than a test of psychic mastery. Fascinating, Kara murmured, pausing in her meditation to watch the human work. Where she sought to bend reality through willpower, he was learning to dance with it, using the chamber's own properties against itself. The first puzzle required moving 7 floating crystals into perfect alignment to unlock the next chamber. Kara approached it as she'd been trained, calculating the precise mental frequencies needed to manipulate each crystal individually. It was elegant, traditional, and taking valuable time. Meanwhile, Tobias had discovered something the designers never intended. By creating small vibrations in the chamber's resonance field, something he accomplished by humming at specific frequencies, he could make all 7 crystals oscillate in harmony. Instead of moving them individually, he synchronized their natural vibrations and let them find their own alignment. The puzzle solved in half the time. Impossible, Kara breathed, her concentration faltering for the first time in years. But Tobias was already moving to the next challenge, his unconventional methods, gaining momentum. Where the second puzzle demanded reshaping energy barriers through pure thought, he found that the barriers responded just as well to reflected light from his polished equipment buckles, creating interference patterns that achieved the same result, through physics rather than psychics. The crowd outside had fallen silent, watching something unprecedented unfold. The human wasn't just surviving the mental gauntlet, he was rewriting the rules. Kara found herself falling behind, her traditional training suddenly seeming rigid and predictable. She watched Tobias solve a maze that should have taken hours of careful mental mapping by simply marking his path with small tears in his clothing, using physical landmarks instead of psychic awareness. How? She called out as they reached the final chamber, a complex multidimensional lock that typically required absolute mastery of 17 different mental disciplines. Different doesn't mean inferior, Tobias replied, studying the lock's shifting geometric patterns. Your people learn to shape reality with your minds. Humans learn to shape our minds to understand reality. The final lock was a masterpiece of crystalline engineering, its solution hidden in layers of mathematical complexity that most species couldn't even perceive, let alone manipulate. Kara began the intricate mental calculations she'd spent decades mastering, her consciousness expanding to encompass the lock's full dimensional structure. Tobias pulled out a small handheld device, a basic Earth calculator. "You can't be serious," Kara said, her concentration wavering again. "The lock's not magic," Tobias explained, inputting sequences of numbers. "It's just math expressed in crystal matrices. Very complex math, but still math." He showed her the device's screen, covered in equations that mapped the lock's behavioral patterns. "I've been recording its movements since we entered the chamber." The lock chimed and dissolved into sparkling motes of light. Tobias had won the mental gauntlet in record time. The viewing chamber erupted in chaos, cheers, arguments, and the sound of credits changing hands as long-held bets suddenly turned worthless. But Kara barely heard the noise. She floated in the zero-gravity chamber, staring at the human who had just shattered every assumption she'd held about her own superiority. "Incredible," she whispered, and for the first time, her voice held genuine admiration rather than mockery. As they returned to normal gravity, Kara found herself studying Tobias with new eyes. His unconventional thinking hadn't been random or undisciplined. It had been brilliantly adaptive, finding solutions that her rigid training had never considered possible. "One trial down," Tobias said quietly as they walked toward the exit. "Though I have to admit your traditional approach was beautiful to watch. There's something to be said for that kind of mental discipline." Kara felt an unexpected warmth at his compliment, her cheeks darkening with a blush that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with a growing respect for this surprising human. The blade dance awaited tomorrow, and suddenly, Kara wasn't certain of anything anymore. The blade dance arena was a circle of polished obsidian surrounded by crystalline walls that amplified every sound, every breath, every heartbeat. It was here that Vraxian warriors proved their worth through the ancient art of ceremonial combat, not a fight to the death, but a contest of skill, grace, and perfect form that could last for hours. Kara entered the arena as she had countless times before, her ceremonial blade singing through the air in the ritual warm-up sequence. The weapon was a work of art, curved like a crescent moon, its crystalline edge catching the arena lights and throwing rainbow patterns across the obsidian floor. Her movements flowed like water, each strike and parry executed with the perfection of someone who had trained since childhood in the 17 classical forms. The crowd watched in appreciative silence as she completed the traditional sequence, her blue skin gleaming with a light sheen of exertion, her crimson curls now bound back in the warrior's knot that left her elegant neck exposed. She was magnificent, and she knew it. Tobias entered wearing simple combat gear, reinforced clothing and a straight-bladed sword that looked primitive compared to her crystalline weapon. He moved through his own warm-up routine, and Kara found herself frowning. His technique was adequate, basic. He clearly had training, but nothing that approached the sophisticated artistry of Vraxian blade work. "I must ask again," she said as they took their positions. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? The blade dance rewards precision and form. Brute force will not serve you here." "Thanks for the concern," Tobias replied, settling into a ready stance that looked almost casual compared to her perfect classical position. "But I think I'll manage." The ceremonial chime sounded, and they began. Kara opened with the flowing river sequence, a series of strikes that built momentum like rushing water, each attack flowing seamlessly into the next. It was beautiful, deadly, and should have ended the match within moments against an opponent of Tobias's apparent skill level. Instead, he simply wasn't where her blade expected him to be. Her first strike passed through empty air as Tobias swayed aside with an almost lazy motion. Her second met only his sword, positioned exactly where it needed to be to deflect her attack without disrupting his own balance. Her third found him already moving, not retreating but circling, turning her perfect sequence into something that felt suddenly clumsy and predictable. "Interesting," she murmured, shifting to the mountain's strength form. Powerful downward strikes that emphasized precision overflow, but Tobias met each attack with responses that defied classification. He didn't use any recognizable fighting style because he seemed to be inventing his approach as he went, adapting to each of her techniques with creative solutions that her classical training had never prepared her to counter. When she attacked, high, he went low, but not in any prescribed defensive pattern. When she feinted left, he somehow knew it was a feint and was already positioning for her real attack. Most frustrating of all, he began to predict her sequences, countering combinations. She hadn't even begun yet. "How are you doing this?" she demanded, breathing harder than she had in any fight in years. "You telegraph everything 3 moves ahead," he replied, not even winded. "Beautiful technique, but I can read your body language like a book." Kara felt a flush of anger, then grudging admiration. Her perfect forms, drilled into muscle memory through decades of practice, had become predictable to someone who approached combat as improvisation rather than art. She switched tactics, abandoning the classical sequences for a more freestyle approach. If he wanted unpredictability, she would show him what a master could do when freed from formal constraints. The change in her fighting style was immediately apparent. Suddenly, she was dangerous in ways that pure technique couldn't capture. Creative, intuitive, responding to the moment rather than following predetermined patterns. Her blade work became a conversation with his, each exchange building on the last. For the first time since entering the arena, Tobias had to work for his defensive positions. Kara's newfound spontaneity pushed him back step by step, her attacks coming from angles that classical training would never permit. But that made perfect tactical sense. "Better," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice as he barely deflected a strike that would have scored a clean hit. Something about his tone, not condescending but respectful, acknowledging her skill while still competing against it, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. When had anyone spoken to her as an equal rather than either worshipping her victories or fearing her reputation? Their combat evolved into something neither had experienced before. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about pushing each other to exceed their own limitations. Kara found herself attempting combinations she'd never tried, inspired by his unpredictable responses. Tobias discovered that fighting someone of her caliber forced him to reach deeper into his own capabilities than any previous opponent had demanded. The crowd had gone silent, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented, not just a contest between different fighting philosophies, but a genuine partnership emerging through conflict. The decisive moment came when Kara attempted her most ambitious technique, a spinning attack that left her momentarily vulnerable but, if successful, would be impossible to counter. It was a move that required absolute trust in her own skill and perfect timing. Tobias could have ended the match then, could have scored the winning hit while she was committed to the spin. Instead, he chose to match her ambition with his own, improvised counterspin, turning their duel into a moment of shared artistry. They completed their rotations simultaneously, both breathing hard, both smiling despite the intensity of their combat. For a heartbeat, they stood close enough that Kara could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath. "Your move," she whispered. Tobias's final attack was simple, a straight thrust that any first-year student could have executed. But he delivered it with perfect timing, finding the one moment when Kara's beautiful, complex defenses couldn't adapt quickly enough to something so elementally basic. His blade stopped a millimeter from her throat. The arena erupted in disbelief, but Kara barely heard the noise. She was staring into Tobias's eyes, seeing something there that she'd never encountered in 47 victories. Genuine respect for her skill combined with the quiet confidence of someone who had just proven himself her equal. "Incredible match," he said softly, lowering his weapon. "I've never fought anyone who made me work that hard." Kara felt her heart racing, and for the first time in her life, it wasn't from combat adrenaline. You won." "We both won," Tobias replied. "That was the most beautiful fight I've ever been part of." As they walked from the arena together, Kara found herself stealing glances at this human who had just changed her world twice in 2 days. The honored guest vow suddenly seemed less like a punishment, and more like an opportunity to understand how someone so different could challenge everything she thought she knew about strength, skill, and herself. The ceremonial chamber where Vraxian honor debts were fulfilled had witnessed countless moments of triumph and surrender, but never anything quite like this. Kara knelt on the traditional crystal platform, her ceremonial robes flowing around, her like liquid sapphire, while representatives from dozens of worlds watched in stunned silence. The undefeated champion of Vraxthul was about to bind herself in service to a human, something that would have been unthinkable mere days ago. I, Kara Vorthak, acknowledge my defeat and bind myself to the honored guest vow. She spoke the ancient words clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. By the sacred laws of my people, I offer my secrets, my loyalty, and my trust to Captain Tobias Drake of Earth. Tobias stood before her, still somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd won. The honored guest vow wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a sacred bond that would make Kara his advisor, his cultural liaison, and his personal advocate in all matters relating to Vraxian society. In practical terms, she would be sharing quarters with him for the remainder of the tournament, bound to answer his questions truthfully and represent his interests as if they were her own. I accept your vow, Tobias replied, following the ritual script he'd hurriedly memorized. And I pledge to honor the trust you place in me. The crowd dispersed gradually, many still shaking their heads in disbelief. Two species that had maintained polite but distant relations for decades were now bound together in one of the most intimate relationships Vraxian culture recognized. Later that evening, Kara arrived at Tobias's quarters carrying a single travel case, all her personal belongings, condensed to the essentials required for the honored guest role. She had traded her champion's ceremonial armor for simpler robes that marked her new status, their deep blue fabric complementing her skin tone, while the silver threading caught the soft lighting of his quarters. "This is strange for you," Tobias observed, gesturing for her to sit on the comfortable seating area he'd arranged, having to serve instead of being served. "Strange, yes," Kara admitted, settling gracefully into the chair across from him, "but not unpleasant. The honored guest vow is not truly about servitude. It's about trust, about opening one's heart to another completely. And you're okay with that? Opening your heart to a human?" Kara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the gentle light. "You've already seen things about me that no one else has. In the mental gauntlet, you showed me that my rigid thinking was a limitation, not a strength. In the blade dance, you fought me as an equal, not as a trophy to be claimed or a legend to be defeated." She rose and moved to the large window overlooking the arena complex, her reflection ghost-like in the reinforced glass. "Do you know what it's like to be undefeated? To have everyone either worship you or fear you, but never simply see you?" Tobias joined her at the window, standing close enough that he could smell the subtle floral scent of her hair. "Lonely? Terribly lonely," she whispered. "Until 2 days ago, I thought I was superior to every other being in the galaxy. Now I discover that a human can make me think, make me grow, make me feel." "Feel what?" She turned to face him, her emerald eyes reflecting vulnerability he'd never expected to see from the proud champion. Alive. Truly alive. Not just existing in the glow of past victories. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Tobias reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched one of her crimson curls. The texture was softer than he'd expected, like silk warmed by sunlight. "The honored guest vow," she said softly, "requires that I share my deepest secrets with you. Only if you want to." "I want to." She moved closer, her blue skin almost luminescent in the soft light. "My greatest secret is that I've been waiting my entire life for someone who could see past the champion to the woman beneath, someone who could challenge me without trying to diminish me. Kara, when you defeated me," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "you didn't gloat or demand my humiliation. You acknowledged the match as something we both won. No one has ever given me that gift before." Tobias cupped her face gently in his hands, marveling at how her alien features had become beautiful rather than strange to him. You're remarkable. Not because you're an undefeated champion, but because you're brave enough to let someone see who you really are. When their lips met, it was with the same careful intensity that had characterized their blade dance, a meeting of equals, each giving and taking in perfect balance. Kara's skin was warm beneath his touch, her body fitting against his as if they'd been designed to complement each other despite their different origins. They broke apart reluctantly, both breathing unsteadily. The honored guest quarters, Kara said with a slight smile, are traditionally shared with one's master. I'm not your master, Tobias replied firmly. If anything, we're partners now. Partners, she repeated, as if testing the word. I like that better. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories of their different worlds and cultures, discovering that despite their alien origins, they shared similar hopes, fears, and dreams. Kara told him about growing up as a warrior caste daughter, the pressure to maintain her family's honor, and the isolation that came with being exceptional. Tobias shared his own journey from a struggling freighter captain to someone brave enough to challenge the galaxy's greatest champion on a whim and a prayer. As the night deepened, they found themselves on the comfortable sleeping alcove. Kara curled against Tobias's side with her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Tomorrow the whole galaxy will know that a human defeated Kara Vorthak, she murmured against his skin. Is that going to cause problems? Probably, she admitted. But right now I find I don't care. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. Tobias tightened his arms around her, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. The honored guest vow works both ways, you know. You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing. What's that? Someone who sees me as more than just another struggling human trying to make his way in a galaxy full of superior species. You make me feel like I'm worthy of the challenges I've been facing. They fell asleep entwined. Two unlikely partners, from different worlds, bound together by a bet that had become something far more precious than either had expected. 3 months after the tournament, the Galactic Council chambers buzzed with unprecedented activity. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had gathered to witness something that most had thought impossible. Formal peace negotiations between the traditionally proud Vraxian Empire and the upstart human colonies that had been demanding recognition as equals in galactic society. At the center of the negotiations sat two figures who had become legend across known space. Captain Tobias Drake, the human who had defeated the unbeatable champion, and Kara Vorthak, the Vraxian warrior who had honored her oath so completely that she'd become Earth's most effective advocate. The Vraxian Empire has always maintained that military prowess determines a species' worthiness for full council membership, declared Ambassador Thexval, his 4 arms gesturing emphatically. Humans have proven inadequate in every significant conflict. Kara rose from her seat with fluid grace, her ceremonial robes now bearing both Vraxian and Earth insignia, a symbol of the unprecedented cultural bridge she had become. With respect, Ambassador, that assessment is based on outdated assumptions about human capabilities. The champion speaks out of turn, Thexval protested. Her association with the human has clearly compromised her judgment. My association with Captain Drake has enlightened my judgment, Kara replied firmly. I have seen human ingenuity solve problems that defeated Vraxian tradition. I have witnessed human adaptability overcome obstacles that would have stopped our rigid thinking entirely. Tobias watched his partner with undisguised admiration. Over the past months, Kara had transformed from a proud warrior into a skilled diplomat, using her legendary status to open doors that had remained closed to humanity for decades. Her influence had convinced 3 major Vraxian houses to reconsider their positions on human integration, and her detailed reports on human tactical thinking had impressed even the most skeptical members of the Vraxian High Command. Perhaps, Tobias said, rising to join Kara, we should discuss this in practical terms. The recent Caridian incident provides an excellent case study. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew about the Caridian incident, a space-borne crisis that had threatened to destroy a major trade route, solved only through an unprecedented collaboration between human and Vraxian forces. The Caridian pirates had taken control of the Nexus station using traditional siege tactics, Tobias continued. Vraxian doctrine called for a direct assault that would have resulted in massive civilian casualties. Human tactical analysis suggested an alternative approach. An approach that seemed cowardly to our commanders, Thexval interjected. An approach that saved 3,000 lives, Kara countered. Captain Drake's unconventional strategy used the station's own defensive systems against the pirates, ending the siege without a single civilian death. The Vraxian crews involved in that operation now speak of human tactical genius, not human inadequacy. The holographic display activated, showing the successful mission in detail. Tobias and Kara presented their analysis together, their partnership evident in the seamless way they built on each other's points, covered each other's weaknesses, and presented a unified front that was more effective than either could have achieved alone. The success of human-Vraxian cooperation, Kara concluded, has exceeded every projection. Our species complement each other perfectly. Human creativity and adaptability combined with Vraxian discipline and resources. And yet, Ambassador Thexval said slowly, this partnership rests on the unusual relationship between two individuals. What happens when the honored guest vow expires? Kara and Tobias exchanged glances, a communication that needed no words. Their relationship had evolved far beyond the formal bonds of the original vow, but they had been waiting for this moment to make their true intentions public. The honored guest vow, Kara said, expired weeks ago. I remain by Captain Drake's side by choice, not obligation. More than that, Tobias added, taking her hand in front of the entire Galactic Assembly. I've asked Kara to be my wife, and she's agreed to accept. The chamber erupted in chaos. Interspecies marriages were rare but not unheard of, but a union between Earth's most successful diplomat and Vraxthol's greatest champion represented something unprecedented, a permanent bond between two species that had barely tolerated each other months earlier. As the noise subsided, Kara continued, our union is not just personal. It represents the potential for our peoples to grow together, to become stronger than either could be alone. I have seen human determination overcome impossible odds, and Captain Drake has shown our people the value of flexibility and innovation. The Vraxian High Command, Tobias announced, has agreed to sponsor Earth's application for full council membership. The human colonies have agreed to share our tactical innovations and exploration data with Vraxian forces. This is just the beginning of what we can accomplish together. Over the following hours, the formal treaties were signed, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and cultural exchange programs that would bind the two species together for generations. But the real victory was quieter, more personal. The sight of Kara and Tobias working together, their different perspectives creating solutions neither could have found alone. That evening, in their private quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel, they stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars streak past as they traveled toward Earth for their wedding ceremony. Do you ever regret it? Tobias asked, his arm around Kara's waist. Giving up your title? Your status as champion? Kara leaned into his embrace, her crimson curls spilling over his shoulder. I didn't give up being a champion. I became a different kind of champion, one who fights for understanding instead of victory. And the galaxy is better for it. We're better for it, she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. I thought I was complete when I was undefeated. I had no idea how much I was missing until I met someone who could show me what partnership really means. Their kiss was interrupted by a soft chime from Tobias's communicator. He glanced at the message and smiled. What is it? The Andromedans have requested human Vraxian negotiation teams for their territorial dispute with the Centauri Federation. Apparently, word of our success has spread. Kara laughed, the sound bright with joy and anticipation. I suppose we're going to be busy. The best kind of busy, Tobias agreed. Changing the galaxy, one impossible partnership at a time. As their ship continued toward Earth, carrying news of the first human Vraxian alliance in galactic history, neither could have imagined that their chance meeting at a tournament would become the foundation for a new era of cooperation among the stars. But perhaps that was the most human trait of all, the ability to find hope and build bridges in the most unlikely circumstances. The bet had been settled, the vow fulfilled, but their real victory was just beginning. Together, they would show the galaxy that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from defeating your opponents, but from learning to dance with them instead.